Hello and welcome to this CG Cookie tutorial. My name is Kent Trammell, and in this video I want to show you how simple and efficient it can be to rig your bipedal character with the Rigify add-on by Nathan Vegdahl. I'll be using this Clive character you see here from the Animation Fundamentals training DVD to demonstrate the usage of Rigify. So if you're like me and thoroughly enjoy modeling characters, you may also be like me in that occasionally you want to see your character come to life with animation. However, before you get to the fun part of actually moving your character, you must trudge through the often polarizing journey of character rigging. By polarizing, I mean that a select few will embrace rigging, but the majority will hate it and never venture there again after the initial attempt. And again, if you're like me, you probably fall into the latter category. Well, thanks to Mr. Vegdahl and his add-on, you and I both can breeze through the rigging stage and still be able to animate our character models, and with a solid rig to top it off. So let's find out what this is all about. The first thing we need to check is that the add-on is enabled. So let's open up our user preferences, and in the add-ons panel, in the search bar, I will type rig, and we can see Rigify pop up here. It is included in the latest official build of Blender 2.66, and you can see that I have it enabled here. So we can close our user preferences, and to start using Rigify in object mode, I will hit Shift A. And in the Armature option, let's choose Human Meta Rig. This will not be available if the add-on is disabled. So let's click that. We can see it pop up, an armature with a fully bipedal setup. What exists initially are just these kind of reference bones. We're going to use this to position and match the proportions of our mesh that we're trying to rig. And then Rigify will generate an actual usable rig from these reference joints. So we can see that the scale here is a little bit off, and instead of scaling the armature, I'm going to go ahead and scale my model up. So like any good model that's ready to be rigged, all of our transforms need to be applied. We can see here that location is 0 all the way down, rotation is 0, and scale is 1. This means that all of our transforms are applied. But I want to scale my character up to match the meta rig a little bit better. So that looks good to me. But since I scaled, I need to hit Control A to apply the scale. Now our scale is back to 1. And at this point, we're ready to move all of our reference joints to match our model. So with the armature selected, I will tab into the armature edit mode and then hit 1 and 5 on my number pad to go into the front orthographic view. Now, before you actually start moving these points, I highly encourage you to turn on the X mirror option over here in the tool panel. This way, if I move a joint on the left side of the body, the right side will match it perfectly, and this just cuts our workload in half. Okay, when setting up your reference joints, instead of just clicking all of the heads and the tails of all of our joints and just moving them into place like so, I recommend that you approach it by rotating instead of translating, at least to start off this positioning process. So let me undo that. And what I mean is, in order to position this leg, I want to select this joint up here, which represents the hip, and hit Shift S, cursor to select it. This will place our cursor at this position, which represents the pivot for the entire leg. So now I can hit B to bring up my marquee select. Let's select the entire leg. And with my pivot point at the 3D cursor, we can rotate this guy into position. The reason I encourage you to use rotation initially is that each bone has a roll value here. You can see it in the in panel, and with a chain of joints, as most of the joints in a good rig are laid out, the rolls will correspond to one another. So if I just start moving these points individually from one another, the rolls will start to get messed up, and the orientation in general of these joints will start to get a little bit wonky, which can have some bad effects once we generate the actual rig. So now that I've rotated the majority of the leg into position, I can come here and finely tune where I want this knee joint to be placed. And then I can just come in here and move the knee into position to better match my model. And with that looking good, I'll jump into the right orthographic view with the 3 key on the number pad. And let's move our ankle joint up to match where the ankle should be. Then I'll take the toe tip, move that out front with Y. Take the ball joint, move that to match up where the ball should be, And then this point at the heel, let's move that to the heel of our character. Also, we need to move, I need to move this knee forward. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Move it where the knee joint would be placed. And now I need to move a few joints down here at the hips forward, the hips and the base of the spine. So let's select these two. Also the hip joint again, jump into orthographic view and move them forward about right there so that our leg joint is now in the middle of our leg mesh. And I will just keep moving up the spine here. Let's select the head, put that at a good position, and then I'll move the tail of the head straight up in Z to the top. And then we can move our collarbone out just a bit, something like that. Cool, I'm happy with that. And now I need to rotate the arm into position, and that's really it. I'm saving the arm for last because placing the fingers is the hardest part, takes the most amount of time, as you can imagine. But just like we did the leg, I'll jump into orthographic front view, and with the shoulder joint selected, or rather the head of this arm joint, I will hit Shift S, cursor to selected, select the entire arm. Let's just put it into position. That looks pretty good. Maybe scale the whole arm up a little bit. Okay, then maybe rotate it in an X direction and globally in X. And there we go. That wrist is positioned pretty well. Let's take a look at this elbow. I think I can scale the head of the elbow or the forearm joint up just a bit towards the cursor. That will keep it in line, maybe a little bit more. There we go. I'm placing this joint in the middle of these three concentric edge loops right here that are kind of reinforcing this joint. Very cool. I like the way that that looks. Now I can move on to the hand. Let's see, the important thing about the hand is going to be, again, the role of the joints. Because in almost every character model, the people have their own way of doing the hands. Like this Clive character has, for one, it only has one index finger and then sort of a connected group of 3 fingers. Makes it kind of look like the penguin from Batman Returns. But you can see that the pinky side of this hand is a little bit bent, but then the index finger is straighter. So sometimes character models have all the fingers splayed out straight or up in T-pose. So placing these hand joints requires a little bit more attention. And I'm going to jump in. Let's see. The whole hand to me needs to be a little bit bigger. So first I'll select the wrist joint, snap the cursor to that selection, and then select my hand joints. And let's scale that up so that the knuckles kind of line up with the knuckles of the mesh. That's what I'm looking at right in there. And maybe I'll scale that up just a tad bit more. There we go. And starting with the thumb over here, I'm going to position these fingers to match up a little better. The same way, snap the cursor to this joint, and let's rotate it. Try and find a good position that way, just by rotating. That looks pretty good. The thing I want to keep in mind with each of these fingers, though, if I go to my object data panel for this armature object, let's turn on the axes option. This will show us the axes, the local axes of each one of our joints. And you can see that the y-axis points down the joint, points down each of these joints. The x-axis points off to the side, and then the z-axis points in the direction that our thumb will be curling. But if we look at the mesh, the way that the mesh is kind of lined up, it implies that the bend of the thumb will be more in this direction right here instead of off this direction that matches the roll of my thumb joints. So I need to tweak the roll of these joints to match up with the mesh. And I can do that by selecting this first thumb joint. And then in my roll panel, let's just adjust that till we see the z-axis pointing in the direction that matches our mesh a little better. And instead of doing that to each of these thumb joints individually, I'll select the other 2 first, then select the first thumb joint, making it the active joint or bone. I'm sorry, I come from Maya, so They're called joints in Maya, but these, I guess Blender calls them bones. So I mean the same thing when I say joint and bone. But anyway, with these bones selected, I'll go to Armature, this Armature menu down here in the header, click my bone roll option, which can also be activated by just hitting Control in the viewport. And I'm going to recalculate the bone roll according to the active bone, basically copying the roll from my active bone to all the other selected bones. So with that clicked, you should see the Z-axis line up to that first bone. And there we go. It's lined up to rotate appropriately with the mesh. Now I need to do the same thing to all these other fingers. So let me do this one first. And again, I want to start by rotating, but I'm going to change the pivot point to be median point. And we can move them all together and then rotate them into a better position. I want the finger to just sit inside of the finger mesh as close as possible. Now let me place them individually. And again, in the mesh, you can see these three edge loops that are close together. This signifies a knuckle and a joint pivot that our mesh will be deforming around. So a good modeler will have at least three edge loops signifying these deforming areas. So I've lined that joint up in the middle of those edge loops. Let's do the same down here. And then move this tail out to the end of the finger. And once again, the roll of our bones is out of whack. So let me select this first index finger bone. And in the end panel, let me adjust the roll. Look at the finger, see if it matches up. There we go. I think that's going to be good. Now I will select my other bones in this chain. Select the first bone and Control in active bone. We can see those snap into a proper orientation. But unlike the thumb bone, we have these bones right in here, and they are also not in the proper orientation. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the bone roll from my first index finger joint to its parent bone in the hand. Control in, active bone, they all line up together. Now I will time-lapse the positioning of these other fingers because it's the same process. Alright, so with those positioned, you might notice that I did not fix the roll on this pinky. I'm going to leave that as is so that once I generate the rig, you can see the problem of leaving the roll at the default value. Okay, so let's kind of once over the positioning of all these joints one more time. And yeah, I think that they're pretty good. I can now tab out of edit mode into object mode. And in my Armature properties, the object data panel, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see Rigify buttons with just one option called generate. And this will actually be generating the animatable rig. So I can click that and it will take a couple minutes, maybe a couple seconds. But anyway, there you go. You can see it's been generated. And if I look in my outliner, we have a bunch of new objects. All of these control shapes, these custom bone shapes, have to appear as an object over here with WGT, which means widget. And we can see a ton of those have been added to the outliner, as well as a new armature called rig. We're pretty much done with the meta rig, so I'm just going to move it off to the side. And then we can jump into pose mode, Control Tab on the armature. We can start rotating, and we can see all of our joints working together. It's rigged properly, but of course our mesh is not following it, so we need to skin this mesh to the armature. But the way that the armature is set up, it's fairly complex. Again, it's a very good rig, and any good rig will kind of be complex. But Nathan has taken care of all of the mechanics behind the rig, and in order to skin this, he has separated out specific bones for deformation. So by default in this rig, we have these specific layers that are turned on. And I'm going to leave those layers on, hit A in the viewport to select everything, then H to hide all of the controls. And now I will shift click this layer right here. It's 3 over from the bottom right of the layers UI. And then in the viewport, hitting Z, going into wireframe, we will see these green bones. And these are the bones we'll be using for deformation. So now with only those bones visible, let's hit Control Tab to go back into object mode, select our character model, and then the rig object, hit Control P to parent, and then we'll select the option with automatic weights under the Armature Deform kind of menu. When we click that, selecting our character model again, in the Object Data panel, under Vertex Groups, you can see that we have all these new vertex groups with the prefix DEF, meaning deformation. And in the Vertex Groups options, this little arrow that's pointing down, I can sort the vertex groups, putting them in alphabetical order because there are a lot of them. And if they're sorted alphabetically, that'll make it easier to find, for example, the forearm or the foot bone to paint my weights. But at this stage, we can see that our mesh will be moving. Let's select the rig, Control Tab into pose mode. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the relationship lines in the display menu. And we only have our deformation bones visible at this moment. So I need to shift click the layer that has these bones on it again. And then in the viewport, let's hit Alt H to make everything that we hid earlier, all of our controls, make them visible. Now we can start to control our rig and we can see the body move. It's chugging a little bit. I think that's because of the subdivision surface modifier and more importantly my screen capture software. So I'll go ahead and turn off the subdivision surface modifier. There we go. We can see it reacting much better. And here we go. We have the rig that Nathan has built for everyone to use. And I see this as kind of a standard bipedal rig. It's got awesome controls like foot roll. But oh yeah, those are part of the IK tool set. So some things you'll want to know about the rig is, for one, you can find all of the tools and buttons at the bottom of your in panel. And we can see we've got some rig main properties. And these buttons will change depending on what's selected. You can see with the root control bone selected, we don't get any main properties. But selecting the foot control gives us some FK and IK switching. So let's turn that on. And by default, all of the rig layers are turned on, including the FK and IK tool sets. So for our leg, our left leg, let's go ahead and turn off our FK tools, which just leaves the IK. And with the IK at 1, if I leave it off and move, we get nothing. But turning the switch all the way up to 1, we can now see that IK is controlling the way that our leg moves. And that goes for all the major limbs, like right foot, left and right arms. And likewise, they have their own tool sets, their layers that can be visible and invisible. So these buttons over here to turn off different parts of the rig are great, especially when you get into animation. These make it very easy on the animator. And the hip control, or rig torso control rather, has this pivot slide, which moves the pivot of the torso. Again, very useful for animation and kind of a complex setup if you were to do this manually, but we're very thankful that Nathan has made such a competent rig for all of us to use. Some things to note about the rig, there are no facial controls. I can't imagine how complex that would be to include that in Rigify, but maybe one day. But there's no eye controls either. And that, I think, is something that probably should be in there, but with a intermediate knowledge of rigging, you can easily add those yourself. Now, if I rotate the head, you can see that the eyeballs don't really follow it. And this is not due to Rigify, but this is actually due to skinning the mesh to the rig. So very briefly, if I want to skin these eyes completely to this the head bone, I can tab into edit mode, select Avert on each eye, Control L to select the entire eyeball island, and then in my object data panel, let's go find the head bone right here, and let's set the weight up to 1, hit Assign. So this means that the eyeball now has complete control, or the head bone has complete control over my eyeball meshes. However, when I rotate, you can see that nothing's different. So let's select our body mesh again, hit spacebar, type in normal, and I'm going to click normalize all vertex groups. And there we go. We can see that our eyeball mesh is now following the head mesh completely. But I don't want to go into skinning. Generally, the parent with automatic weights works really, really well. You can see that if I just put this guy in a pose real quick, you can see how simple it is. I need to turn on IK control over the arm, which can be found on the hand joint. But posing this guy, we get pretty solid deformation right out of the box, and it helps that this character is skinny. Skinny characters tend to weight automatically much better. But yeah, we can put this guy in a position and eventually animate him very, very well. It's a solid rig. We have some cool controls at the foot for rolling, like that. Very, very cool. And your IK poles and different controls. But anyway, I hope that you can see how useful this rig is, how simple it is to set up. Oh, and before I forget, let's go into the hand over here. And first, let me scale these 4 fingers, because remember, these are set up correctly where I adjusted the roll angle to properly match the model. So when I scale down, you can see that our hand, our fingers curl in towards the palm like they're supposed to at a proper angle. However, with this other one that I left untouched and scale, you can see how it scales at an angle. And that is because the roll angle was not adjusted properly. So again, this is why I encourage you to pay attention to the roll angles. They need to make sense with the geometry. But anyway, Nathan has given us an incredible gift with Rigify, especially to people like me who prefer to spend most of my time modeling and texturing instead of rigging, but still want to be able to animate my characters occasionally. That's going to be all for this tutorial. I hope to see some bipedal animations from the community here pretty soon. Thank you for watching.